Brian, thank you so much for being my guest today.
Great to be with you, Ann. Good to see you.
You know, the SAT is going through its biggest transformation as it moves from paper and pencil to an all digital format. And really, nobody knows more about this than you. You, Brian, are the author of the Barron's Digital SAT Study Guide, which is an amazing feat to really put together all that information in one place. So you know this test better than anybody else. So thank you again for being here today.
You're very kind.
Brian, I want to start out with really, before we get into the nitty gritty of the test, it seems like having a score is more important than ever before. And we've seen a couple of schools in the last week come out and say they want a test, and it could be leading the way for other schools to come forward. Where are we right now with this test optional environment?
Yeah, so I think in light of increased grade inflation at a lot of high schools and the fact that colleges are inundated with applications, they want to have a standardized metric they can use to evaluate the readiness that students have for colleges. And both Dartmouth and Yale have come out and indicated that a couple of things about these standardized tests. Number one, that they do a great job of predicting how students will perform at the college level. And secondly, by utilizing the test scores, they've actually increased the diversity of their classes because they're able to find students who may not have access to a lot of extracurricular activities, or maybe they're not going to the most highly ranked high schools. But if they're able to demonstrate their academic skills, their readiness for college level work on the SAT, then when they get into a really prestigious college, they're able to flourish. So it's a big shift, and it's sort of like applying for a credit. When you apply for a loan without a credit score, I think it makes it a little more difficult. Having the test score makes things a lot smoother for everybody.
I think that's such a good analogy.
Oh, thank you.
You know this test really well. In your opinion, what are the biggest changes that people can expect?
Yeah, well, first of all, the test will be given on the computer. So that meets students where they are. A lot of students don't have physical textbooks. They do things on their school provided Chromebook or an iPad. So it'll be a digital format. And also a major change is it will be adaptive. So the benefit of that is that instead of the test needing 3-4 hours for students to take, they will only need a little over 2 hours, because students will start with a module that's of average difficulty. And depending on how they do pretty well, usually 60-65% of the questions right. They go on to the more difficult module. If they don't do so hot, they go to the easier module. So instead of students having to try questions from every level of difficulty over a 4-hour period, they can get to the bottom of their readiness in a shorter period of time. And along with that, the reading is a major change. So in the previous SAT, there were just a few long reading passages. And now every reading and writing question is accompanied by a short text, no longer than 150 words. And a lot of students seem to like this change because they can focus on just that text, one thing at a time, instead of having to focus on a 750 word passage and go back and forth with that. So those are some of the major changes that we see.
How can students prepare for this new format? What's the best way?
Yeah, so it does test general academic skills that someone would need for college. So grammar skills, reading comprehension, math. So just bolstering those fundamental skills in school is probably the best thing to do. But in addition to that, I think students can, with the guidance of a tutor, they can remediate their weak areas. During the pandemic, a lot of students have gaps in their math knowledge, geometry, algebra, that tutoring could help. And also, they should make sure to practice with some of the free release tests from Blue Book. There's a downloadable app that College Board will use for the digital SAT called Blue Book, and students can download that onto the same device they'll use for actually taking the test and practice the way that they'll actually take the test with that in the digital adaptive format. So those are a couple major things that students can do.
Let's switch gears for just a moment, Brian, if you don't mind, and talk about how these tests are going to be scored. So we know the SAT is going to be scored on the same scale, but how will this work with super scoring on this new digital version?
So super scoring will probably stay in place. All indications are that colleges that are using tests, which amounts to about 96, 97% of colleges will accept tests if they're submitted. Optional doesn't mean they won't look at it. That would be test blind. That's just a handful. So with the super scoring, for those of who may not know that, that's taking the best score from each section over different tests. And so, in general, a lot of private colleges tend to super score, and some public colleges don't. So, that's a generalization, but you can check with the college admissions office directly and see what their policy is. But I think for students taking the test, if they're thinking about places that super score, then they don't need to feel that all their eggs are in one basket with one half of the test, or sorry, with the whole test, because it's essentially two shorter tests. If you do well in the reading, writing on one day, then the next test you can do better on the math, and then put those together, and you're all good.
That's really an interesting way of thinking about it in terms of the strategy behind preparing,
Mm-hmm.
that maybe you
Yeah.
can piecemeal it a little bit more.
Yeah. So as far as the strategy with that, I think students can look at how they did on the PSAT for an indication of where they might need some improvement, and they could take the test. There's one coming up in March. The first time it will be administered in this format in the United States, and then students shouldn't look at, I need to get this over in just one test sitting. It's probably wise to plan on taking it 2 or 3 times. ACT has indicated that 57% of students improve the second time they take a test, and it starts to level off after the third time. So planning on taking it 2 or 3 times at least is, I think, a wise move.
I'm curious about the rollout. I remember the last couple times the College Board changed the format of the SAT. It was a little bit chaotic. What are you
Yeah.
expecting this time around?
Well, it will be interesting to see how it all goes. I know I live here in Ohio, and I had a number of students who their high school had to change the date of the PSAT because they had some issues with everyone logging in at once. Hopefully, the College Board has worked out some of those kinks there, and this first time in March will go smoothly. Students internationally have indicated that it's gone pretty smoothly, so I'm hopeful that that will go okay. The app records where you are in case there is a problem with the power or the internet, so students don't need to worry about if their progress will be lost with that. But I think it's reasonable to assume that as the year unfolds, that things may get smoother, and students may want to expect that there might be a few hiccups with that March test, since it's the very first time for everyone administering. Hopefully not, but prepare for the worst, hope for the best is what we have to do, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure, Brian. And just out of curiosity, it's such a huge undertaking to write the Barron's book, preparing kids for a brand new test, the digital SAT. What was your most challenging part? And the whole process?
Sure. I think one of the most challenging parts was just trying to anticipate what College Board would do with their tests. So I ended up having to throw out a number of things that were my best guesses of what they would do once they released more materials. So that was a challenge, but that's what you got to do sometimes with these things. But fortunately, with the SAT, they did release quite a bit of material that I was able to use or research to make sure that the book and the instruction fully aligned with what students will see on test day. So it was a lot of work, but I think it'll help students quite a bit.
And I have to tell you, we use the Barron's book for preparing our students. Great. And yeah, it's been fabulous. The teachers love it.
That's great to hear.
It's just, yeah, right on par for what the kids need to know. There's plenty of practice problems. And then we, really balance that with what you're talking about, the online Blue Book tests. Definitely. So it's a nice blend to make sure kids are practicing the digital format, but they still have the content there.
That's great. I tried to write it with tutors in mind, where you think about what will a student need. They need more review of this particular concept, and then you can go in depth with that. And it's not designed to be this. I mean, it's a pretty big book here. It will take a long time to get through everything, but students can pick and choose what they want to focus on for sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Brian, for sharing with us about the new test. We're excited for a smooth rollout, and hopefully we can catch up again.
Great to see you. Thanks a lot. Best of luck to all your students.
Thank you, Brian.
Thanks.